well, here's something different. Painting on black watercolor paper. And since I treated myself to some fine tech iridescent paints, I've been wanting to paint something on black watercolor paper for a long time. And I decided to start out by painting a dragonfly because they are beautifully iridescent and delicate. And I use some Stonehenge watercolor paper and a General's white charcoal pencil to trace the outline. Now I drew the outline first and then made a photocopy on my printer and cut that out so that I could trace around it. Now usually I will use a carbon paper or a light box to do that, to get it cleanly on my paper, but of course I couldn't do that with black paper, so I had to do something different. Now I'm using my Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleedproof white because that shows up beautifully on the black paper. If you don't have that, you could use white gouache or white watercolor, but I've tested them all, and the Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleedproof white is the sharpest, most opaque, beautiful one of all of them. So I'm going to mix mine. I've had mine for several years and it's got a bit thick, so I usually dilute it with some water. And there's also some that's dried up in my palette there, which I can reconstitute with water again to continue my painting. You noticed I already started it before I remembered I'm supposed to be filming this, so I stopped and decided to get busy with my filming. So I'm going to mix the P.H. Martin's white with some water, and then I'm going to show you how you can mix your own iridescent paint, because the fine tech ones are quite expensive. Now this Pearl X powder, I bought Pearl White. It's about $6-7 at our art store for a bottle like this. And I'm using roughly 1/8 teaspoon, making a terrible mess. I shouldn't have had that there, but it will all clean up. It's just powder. Move that off to one side. And I have some gum arabic. Now you can see it was $4.95 for this pot of gum arabic. And I have a little 1/8 teaspoon in there. So it's about equal amount to the Pearl X. And I'm going to mix them together. Now gum arabic is what is used with watercolor paints to bind the pigment. And the Pearl X doesn't have any binder in it. You can put it in any type of paint. And I want to just bind that. So I'm mixing it with the gum arabic first. And using a little bit of water at a time, just a couple of drops. I love these wooden stir sticks that you can get in packs of 100 or 200 or something. Very reasonably at most dollar stores. They're great for stirring. And you can see for lifting paint out of things, and very useful. I wash them and use them over and over. I don't waste them. So I'm going to mix up the pearly mixture first, and then I'm going to use that to color my watercolors. So I'm going to make my own pearl colors, which you can do if you don't want to go out and spend $50 or so on a little pack of expensive paints. I'm going to use the Winsor Blue, which is essentially a Phthalo Blue, to make a bright blue, and mix it with a little of that Pearl X mixture, tiny bit at a time, because once you've made it too strong, you can't go back. You have to keep diluting it with more and more medium. So I've taken a bit of the white, and I'm going to add some Dioxazine Purple, which is a very strong pigment. Mine is a Winsor & Newton one, and I always find it a beautiful strong purple. So just a little bit with the white and the Pearl X. I bought myself a new Princeton script liner. It's a 2/0, beautiful for making long thin lines. And then I love my silver black velvet brushes, my number 2, and I have a 000 Kolinsky Sable small brush, and then just a general sort of a brush, very 0001 that cost me like $3. That one's not so expensive. You don't have to spend a lot of money to get a decent brush, but I'm a bit of a brush junkie and I love having a beautiful brush. So I'm using my new Princeton script liner here to get some very thin white lines for the veins on the dragonfly wings. I usually try to use my own photographs, but this time it's midwinter, it's not the season for dragonflies, so I used our dear friend Google to go find an image of a dragonfly, and I studied very, very carefully how the veins on the wings look, And I did some detailed drawings before I started my painting, and one of my drawings became a line drawing that you saw me trace at the beginning. So I'm dotting in a little of the white and then the purple and then the blue. That's for the reflections on the wings. And although I want this to look similar to the photograph, I also want to put my own stamp on it and have it look a little bit loose and watercolory. So I'm sort of dotting in those reflections on the wings. I also mixed a little bit of Phthalo Green with the white and the Pearl X powder. Now you can get different pearl powders. There's Perfect Pearls by Ranger, and probably your art store will have some kind of pearl powders. Any of them are going to make you a beautiful iridescent paint. And remember, you can mix them with any of your watercolors. And if you have a little palette like this, I find these are the most handy. You can reconstitute them if you let them dry. You can come back and add a bit of water and mix them up again. You don't have to throw them out. And a little goes a long way. I have also mixed some burnt sienna with the white and the iridescent because there were some very warm reflections on this dragonfly. In places almost brown, but of course brown's not going to show up, not a dark brown on this black paper. So where things are dark, such as the legs, I have gone with white or this bronzy colour so that they show up. I've had to change what I'm seeing for effect. But the body, I'm going to leave the black paper showing through so that you can see the beautiful designs on the body. And I really enjoyed doing this. I've never really tried painting on black watercolour paper before. I have the black drawing paper, which I tried out my fine tech paints on, and I made some birthday cards and different things. But when I saw this pad of watercolour paper, I thought I'm going to try something different. Of course, it's quite expensive too. I think that pad cost $27 or something, which makes you a little bit reluctant to use it sometimes. But I actually tore one of the sheets in half. I'll get used to using it, and then I won't be so cheap about it. So I'm putting in a little bit more in the way of reflections. It looks quite white on camera, but when it's dry and you see it in real life, it's actually got quite a strong blue tinge to it. I love the design on this dragonfly. It almost sort of looks like a totem pole design. Very bright. So I'm using the white for the design right here, and I used the blue for the previous part, and then I'm going to go into the bronze for the part that looks very bronze on the dragonfly. The wings are so delicate, so fine and gossamer-like. You wonder how they can actually fly. Incredible creatures. And before they transform into a dragonfly, when they're, I guess it's called the nymph or larval stage in the water, they're such ugly-looking little things. They come into their beauty at the end of their life. So I'm using my very small 000 Kolinsky sable brush for these little fine details. And I must say I quite enjoyed using my little brushes. I don't get them out very often because I tend to paint in bigger washes. But it's nice to go back to the discipline of very fine lines once in a while. Outline the edge of the body. And right at the end of the body, there's some like little sort of pincer things, probably part of the abdomen and elimination area for the dragonfly. And back to the blue. I was very pleased with how just using this fine tech powder worked out for making really beautiful iridescent paint, and not too expensive either. And I think the pot of powder is going to last a long time. It comes in many different colors. You can get, I don't know how many colors there are. over 25, and you could get a whole mess of beautiful colors, but I think mostly you only need some pearl white, maybe some gold. I'm using a paper sanding block there just to erase a couple of my splatters that I made accidentally. And of course, again, on black paper, if you make a mistake with the paint, it's very hard to correct, even more difficult than if you're using white paper. At least with white paper, you can sort of maybe put a darker wash over the top, or do a bit of washing back, or use some Dr. P.H. Martin's white to disguise it. But once you've got a mistake on the black, it's really obvious. So that little sanding block is for sanding paper to get small mistakes off. And of course it does distress the paper. And I found that this black watercolor paper doesn't really act like white watercolor paper. It's very soft, very absorbent. You can't really erase on it. It doesn't take a wash all that well. I did try some washes, but it's more like a sort of a blotting paper. I guess the black dye that they have to add to it changes the paper. And of course it has a little bit of sizing on, but it definitely doesn't have this amount of sizing that you get on the white watercolor paper and the good quality ones. I like to use Arches paper. I've tried many other different brands, but I always go back to my Arches Coldpress 140 pound. That's my favorite. I must say this was fun using the black paper. I'm going to try, after this, I'm going to try some snowdrops and maybe something else that uses iridescent or white paint. Now I'm going to be bold and try a wash for the plant that the dragonfly was standing on. And after I'd done this, I didn't really like the direction. I did another painting after this, so I didn't like the direction of the plant too much. But it's an experiment. I'd never tried a wash on here before, so I was seeing what it looked like. And I'm trying to keep it very loose because the dragonfly is tight and detailed, and I wanted the branch, the plant, to be very, very loose and not too detailed. And of course, every time you paint something, you usually plan what you do different next time. So if I keep painting on black paper, it's going to be different each time I try it. That's fun. I really like using these different sort of watercolor paints. And it truly is watercolor. Yeah, I'm using watercolor paper, I'm using watercolor paints, I'm using water to blend them, even if it's not how you traditionally think of it. And when that wash dried, it dried a little less defined, so that is what I wanted. I didn't want it to be too defined. Yeah, well, thank you for watching. I hope you have fun trying out your black watercolor paper.